This is Abe Friedtanzer from Awards Buzz. Very excited to be speaking with Chase Joynt about State of Firsts. How are you, Chase?
I'm great, Abe. Thanks so much.
I'm excited to talk to you. I was at the Tribeca Festival in 2019 and I saw a film called For They Know Not What They Do.
Hmm.
And that is how I first found out about Sarah because she was one of the subjects of this film. And so it feels very appropriate that there is another Tribeca film that will be celebrating her, especially that she has so much more of a national profile at this point.
Amazing. What a return.
When did you first learn about her existence?
As a trans person making various kinds of work in the world, I definitely knew Sarah McBride's name as I was engaging various kinds of trans media. But it wasn't until I was approached by the producing team about the potentials of this project that I really dove deep into her backstory and learned so much about her. And I will say that it was actually through the process of making the film that I, of course, learned the most.
Was she eager to be a subject in something like this? Because I know that's sort of what the film is about, right? The idea of accomplishing something while not constantly having her story follow her everywhere.
Right. Yeah, you've identified one of the key tensions for sure. And I think we benefit greatly from the fact that one of our producers, Jenna Kelly, went to college with Sarah. And so has long been in conversation about the potential of a project like this. So I think Sarah knew, and it was fun to engage questions of what kind of story we might tell.
It's also interesting to me, just as a documentary filmmaker, how you decide what to include and not to include about her backstory. Because, for instance, that film, For They Know What They Do, is a lot about her experience with religion growing up. And there was a point in this film where her father talks about her setting up a podium. I was like, oh, this is going to be all about the religious stuff, but it's not. It's just about the interest in politics. So I'm curious if there are things that came up in her backstory that you said this is interesting, but we just don't have the time and room to include those here.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for that read. So we are in a moment in 2025 where we have access to a variety of different kinds of trans stories and stories about trans people, and some of the ways in which they rely on a particular kind of coming of age story about gendered becoming. And I thought, well, what happens if we just avoid that altogether and actually ask a different set of questions about coming of age that are actually, to your point, about a political becoming, about the understanding of an approach to life that is about a pursuit of politics. And that is, in fact, the driving force of Sarah's life.
And I have encountered, things about Sarah a lot for whatever unfortunate time I spend on Twitter/X, just Nancy Mace, Marjorie Taylor Greene,
Yes.
and also just the belligerence that people have in constantly spending every moment trying to dead name her and all these other things. And I imagine that making the story that can be somewhat crushing along the way, just encountering so much unbridled hate that just people seem to need to fill their time with.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that Sarah speaks to in the film is the desire to be working on behalf of Delawareans and to be thinking about policy initiatives and to have everything return to an attention about transness, even as she is attempting to focus those spotlights elsewhere.
I do appreciate the emphasis on Wawa and Delaware. And I don't know much about whether Delaware, its film festival scene, but does it feel sort of strange to be premiering this in New York rather than nearby Delaware?
We will definitely bring the film to Delaware, and we're very excited to do so. And I think that New York and Tribeca in particular is such a wonderful launchpad for a film. They're so deeply engaged in films about politics, about the political present. And I think the audiences will be uh, a really exciting place for us to continue to have these conversations.
Were there any challenges just filming in the political world and in political settings where I feel like people are always on phones and have cameras these days, but I don't know if there were any obstacles that you might not have expected?
The again, it's another moment where I get to compliment our producer Jenna Kelly on her ongoing collaboration with Sarah's campaign team, in particular the campaign manager Michaela, who were schedule wizards in attempting to figure out how we could get in, how we could stay close. And of course, there's always the question of what do we do with the fact that everybody's on phones and what do we do with the fact that everybody's on screens. But in a moment where so much of the news that's unfolding is also being delivered to us in these ways, it felt like a kind of seamless way to move in and out of the news media and then back into the intimacy of the campaign.
What do you feel like you learned about this whole world of politics from making this film?
One of the things that I was energized to continue to encounter while shooting with Sarah is her real commitment to the local, her real commitment to Delaware and the relationship between what is happening in Delaware and what's happening in national politics. And I understood that an opportunity to be making this film at this time was a way in which to draw attention to the anti-trans legislation and backlash that surrounds us, and to use it as an opportunity to also create conversation with much broader audiences about trans issues.
I think there's also two moments in the film that stick out to me in terms of, spotlighting the fact that she wants to accomplish something and she knows what she has to do that. One is when someone asks her about Gaza and she says, yes, of course I feel a certain way, but that is not my issue. I'm here to represent Delaware. And there are many issues that are presently, facing that. And also the idea of not pressing the bathroom issue because she realizes that will bring a target on her back. And while it's an opportunity, as people say, for, you know, real transformation and change, it doesn't happen like that, and it does present a real safety risk. So I appreciate you including both of those. I think as a if that was just going to be a very quick summary, I think of her, campaign platform and the way that she looks at how everything intersects, I think that really works
Mm-hmm.
very well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that what you're drawing attention to is also just a broader tension in the film and in this political moment between activist and electoral strategies of social change and the questions we ask and the moves we make in these conditions.
I think she also works well within the Democratic Party in a way that now we're seeing a lot of fission where people aren't necessarily happy with what's happening and trying to push back. And I imagine that you would expect some pushback from some people who feel that Sarah isn't doing enough to advocate for them because she's trying to balance everything.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so for me as a director, it was an opportunity to think, how can the film become a container where those kinds of critiques also have space and where Sarah can speak to her relationship to the critiques, to the ongoing decisions that she's making, and that we as an audience can have to encounter both of those things simultaneously.
And who do you hope most populates that audience at your Tribeca screenings?
It might sound like a silly answer, but I really hope that we have a wide and vast audience that aren't all made up of a certain kind of identity or political persuasion. I think now is the time for urgent portraits that are complex, that ask us to hold multiple truths simultaneously. I think it's our only way forward.
Absolutely. And do you have plans for the film after this, or that's still in the works?
We go straight from Tribeca to DC docs, which feels like a really exciting move to make, a different kind of local. And yes, we hope to continue on the festival scene and also to emerge to as many eyeballs as possible, as they say.
And do you have eyes on the next project for yourself?
I am currently making a film about the extraordinary trans musician Beverly Glenn Copeland, and that should be out sometime later this year, if not top of next.
Wonderful. Is there other media that you've consumed recently that you think is really doing a great job telling important trans stories?
Oh, I love that question. I think we are very lucky to emerge in a moment where there's another film called Heightened Scrutiny made by Sam Fader about the ACLU lawyer Chase Joynt. And it feels like in some ways a twin companion project that is, of course, in a different circumstance with different folks, but asking in some ways a core set of shared questions.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking of that film. I don't know what's happening. I just saw it at a festival. I don't know what's happening with it now, but it's nice. I feel like those, the political advocacy and stories that a lot of people might know, but a lot of people may not. And it's a great opportunity to be very vibrant, magnetic people at the center of all.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's still on the festival scene, so hopefully a long way to go.
Well, I wish you plenty of luck reaching as diverse a possible an audience with this, and look forward to seeing what's next for you, for Sarah, and for everything else.
Thanks, Abe. I really appreciate it.